friends. Really nice to see you back after Easter, and I am just very excited about this episode because we're going to the 8th one, and we have consistently tried. I mean, the whole purpose of this is to sit down a little bit like after work hours and talk about different aspects and different ways of looking at transformative innovation. And we have certainly done that over the one. I was actually looking at kind of the episodes over time and the various perspectives that we've given on it. But this time we are actually going to return to a topic that we already elaborated on the second episode, if some of you remember. So this is the first time we're returning to a theme. On that occasion, that was just after TOS ICP, which for those who haven't been around and or that familiar with the UN lingo, it's the team of specialists for innovation and competitiveness policies that we have here in UECE. We met in November, and on that occasion, we tried to bring a new angle to the discussion of transformative innovation, but actually digging in a little bit more to the process. We had the year before talked about what transformative innovation is and what the kind of the target areas for policy interventions are. But on that occasion, we tried to stretch our thinking a little bit and get to the point of how do we do it? And our sort of, let's call it, for the lack of better word, intellectual and practical starting point was that when we're trying to promote transformative innovation, there are a couple of challenges that are really deal with uncertainty. First of all, the target area itself, the world that we are supposed to interfere with and transition that we want to spur is extremely complex in terms of scale, in terms of interrelationships, non-linear causal relationship, potential tipping points, uncertain outcomes, and we all know that. But the point here is that at the same time, the solution that we're bringing in, that is to say, have innovation and or even in going into the practical sense of it, experimentation as the engine of change is per se embracing uncertainty. If we knew where we were going, it wouldn't be worthwhile doing because it wouldn't be innovation, and that's kind of the point. So we're trying to solve uncertainty with uncertainty. So that causes us to think a little bit more creatively about how do you actually work with entering uncertainty, and how do you plan for processes of exploration rather than processes of verification, which we normally do when we kind of verify that what we're doing is going in the right direction and we set up the goals. We don't know exactly where we're going, and we don't know exactly how we're going to do it. So this requires that we actually pick up on what is often forgotten when we talk about experiments. There's another side to experiment. It isn't like going out and doing the random thing, which we perhaps in day-to-day life think we just go out and experiment, right? In this case, experiments are very rarely random. They actually have and should have a process for learning and picking up and about what's happening. And that learning process is probably, and that was our hypothesis going in, probably different than what we're used to, given again the complexity of the intervention area, etc., and the fact that we have the solution we're coming in is in fact embracing uncertainty. So what we did was that we talked about that on TOS ICP and found that there was actually quite a lot of interest around the topic. So since then, we've had a particular work theme evolving within the network, around precisely strategic learning. Now it is time to start going back and see where are we? Where have we come into this debate? So it was with particular pleasure that I then have seen now Kjell Håkan Närfelt as the moderator, because Kjell Håkan is, as some of you may know, also the chair of TOS ICP. So he was effectively leading the whole exercise back in November. So in a sense, it's a little bit like a checkpoint. Where is the work heading? And he will then sit with Len Kelleher, that has been the one assuming the role of actually leading most of the work within this theme on strategic learning. So with that, I will just leave the ball over to the two of you and see how you what has happened. Kjell Håkan, please, you're moderating from here on.
Thanks for inviting me to moderate, and you made almost my introduction, but I will still make it. I would like to frame it, but and thanks for reminding that we had this kind of discussion both in the TOS ICP and at the second live podcast. And I remember, to me, that topic when we had that on the second live podcast, it was for me like we're talking about dark matter. You know, everyone knows it exists around us. It is important to system change, but nobody seems to be able to grasp it or make it visible. So let's see if me and Len can make the dark matter less dark and more tangible. And if not, we will continue with these episodes on strategic learning one again later on. But before I get into the framing, I'm only a layman in this topic, but I have this Len as an expert here, so helping me uncover this dark matter, this topic. So over to you, Len. Make a short introduction to yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Kjell. My name is Len Kelleher. I'm based in the University of Cambridge in a research unit where we provide evidence in the area for policymakers. This is in the area of university commercialization and innovation. But I'm also one of the network of coaches for TIPSY, so attached to University of Sussex in some of the work that they've done on their resource lab, which they launched, I think, last year at this stage, which is where I started getting into transformative innovation. So I've been kind of in this area about 2 years or so, and have now, as Mikhail said earlier on, been looking at this work stream of developing this concept around strategic learning for transformative innovation.
Thank you, Len. And before we get into the topic, I would like to do some sort of framing of scoping, because as Len was mentioning, we talk about transformative innovation, and we've talked about ethnics about transformative innovation policy. Are they the same or not? I would say the following: that transformative innovation has always existed, so it's not new. Even from the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, with steam, the electricity, the fossil fuel cars, internet, social media, mobile telephony, innovation has transformed societies. So that's nothing new. It's not new. But transformative innovation policy, for me, it's very new, because with transformative innovation policy, you want intentionally to transform societies and the economy through innovations. And the objective is usually economical, ecological, and societal sustainability, often articulated through the UN SDGs. So this makes it transformative innovation policy different from traditional innovation policy, because innovation policy has traditionally been about innovation and innovation performance as an objective. So innovation performance becomes the objective. Now in transformative innovation policy, innovation becomes the mean, not the objective, the mean to achieve transformation of the society and the economy. And that changes in some way the innovation policy. But we have to understand that both need to coexist and complement and strengthen each other, which is a challenge in itself. I don't know if we get into that, Len, but that's a challenge in itself. So the first level consequence of this view of innovation policy is that it moves innovation policy towards human behavior and the cultures and the mindset and the institutions that drive and govern certain behavior in society and the economy, since outcomes are created by human relations and human behavior. But it also moves innovation policy from the regional and the national focus. Previously, innovation has been looking at how can we make this region or this national context more competitive and growing and so on. But now it moves to a more global geographical focus because most of the challenges we are facing are global. So the focus becomes more complex or complicated in a certain way. But there's a second level consequence that is ontological, which you were hinting on, Mikael. And ontological, which means what lenses are we looking at when we look at market societies and the economy. And I think when we discussed this also at the TOS ICP in November, that we are very deeply rooted in predictive approaches to development and evaluation efforts. And often get caught in this discussion, how do we improve the design methods? How do we improve the evaluation methods? And basically counterfactuals is the golden stamp that everybody should use. And 10 years ago, the Swedish Agency for Growth Policy Analysis, which Mikael knows well because he's working there, they made an evaluation of VINNOVA's SME investments and claim that they couldn't see any significant outcomes or effects of those in investment, which started a huge media debate that VINNOVA was wasting taxpayers' money because they couldn't show any effects of their investments. I had a dialogue with Albert Bravo Biosca when they started IGL, because they claimed, I have some numbers, they claimed that only 3.7% of the innovation programs were credible, looking at the evaluations, and only 0.4% of the innovation programs, and they looked at 1,700, were showing impact. And I was trying to debate with Albert and with the growth policy agencies that, is this correct? Shouldn't you look at the way you evaluate, the way we design, because the problem might be there. And also the growth policy agency got an assignment from the government in Sweden to look into why this was the case, and they came up with a report that said that for example VINNOVA the problem is their selection processes. They need to selection criteria and selection processes is the really key to this defect in their operations. And I replied to that by claiming that, okay, we have to learn from the best VC capitalist and Sand Hill Road in California, and sent them a report from the National Bureau of Economic Research that had recently looked at the ability of the venture capitalists to pick out winners. Looking at their correlation between their selection process, the first selection process, and the outcome. And it was like chimpanzees throwing arrows. There was no correlation between their selection and the outcomes. And I said, okay, we have to learn from them. So in my view, the reason for all this is that we are currently using lenses of complicated system, which what much of the intervention logic and evaluation is today based on. However, when relationships and human behavior determines outcomes, the focus moves innovation policy from complicated system to complex adaptive system and completely new ways of working, new tools, new strategic approaches. So this is like the second level ontological kind of consequence. My view is that we try to capture this in what we call the third generation innovation policies, which in my view is transformative innovation policy. The main components and properties of this innovation policy is the following. Previously, the rationale for interventions have been market and systemic failure. In transformative innovation policy, governments must proactively engage in setting and driving the directionality the society should take. And the implications of that is that transformative innovation must address how to set direction, how to mobilize actors in the right direction, in this desired direction, how to phase out harmful technologies, harmful products, harmful practices, policies, power structures that keeps us in the wrong direction. How to stimulate and drive demand that supports the desired directionality, and how to make the right institutional changes that support and drive the desired directionality. And since we are faced with complex adaptive systems, which are characterized by genuine uncertainty, nobody knows what will work and not work in beforehand. Hence, predictive planning, which we are usually doing, does not work. So we have to manage a future that we cannot predict. Now, I'm very interested, I know Len is also interested in entrepreneurial aspects. And if we take experience from entrepreneurial discovery, which is about managing and creating future that you cannot predict, we co-create an experiment on all levels. We coordinate activities and resources, resource utilization to scale. And we are together the co-pilots in our journey towards the future we are creating day by day together. And experiments without intentional or unintentional learning have little value, which makes learning a key element of transformative innovation policy. However, application, design, and monitoring of experiments and the sense making and dissemination of the results of these experiments are, in my view, the core and context of exploring the theme strategic learning. So, Len, this long kind of framing, do you want to comment or add something before we throw ourselves into the topic of strategic learning?
I think that's a really good framing, Kjell. Just thinking about a couple of the points you've made, without getting dramatically into the concept of strategic learning, which we'll do in a second, I was interested in your comment about how you reconcile new ways of working with this new framing that we have in mind, this transformative innovation framing, and old ways that we're working. When we get into it in a little bit more detail, and I start defining some of the terms that we're focusing on for our concepts here, we're going to be taking a look at the area of dynamic capabilities. So one thing I'm going to stress is that we're not, for this concept of strategic learning for transformative innovation, we're not just looking at, say, a tool or a best practice that can solve all our problems all in one go. What we're actually looking for are complex combinations of things, and there are implications for that. When I'm talking about complex combination, I'm talking about complex combinations of specific capabilities, and the implications for that, which again I'll talk about in a second, are that to be able to do strategic learning looks like it's going to use capabilities that are much more valuable, much more difficult to imitate and substitute than other capabilities that we're more used to, the more tools-based approaches that we're used to. So it's going to be interesting to see how these can, not only how we can find out how people do these things, but how we can disseminate this knowledge so that it can be used in different contexts. I think that'll be a key question.
And I think the framing, which I wanted to say with the different levels, that, for example, today I don't see that politicians or evaluators or designers are looking in the way we look at ourselves. Like, it really implies this kind of double or triple loop learning, which I think you will come back to, which will be very important, which I find we don't do this. That's the dialogue I had with in Sweden and with IGL and Nesta IGL. We need this kind of double and triple loop learning, but you will come back to that. Also, going back to the topic of strategic learning, since I'm a strategic advisor also, I work a lot with strategic issues in innovation policy, and strategies for me in a day-to-day situation is very similar to the military concept. So it's about resource allocation. We get budgets, we get resources. How do you allocate them to reach these kind of long-term sustainability goals? And how do I design interventions that take us towards this directionality, and really can strategic learning be something that helps us perform better, and what would strategic learning look like in that case? So Len, can you give us your view on the concept and describe how we could conceptualize it in the context of transformative innovation as I try to frame it?
Sure. So I'm going to unpick a couple of the terms here, just so that we can unpack what we mean by the concept and then build back up to what we kind of have a formal definition of our concept, or a working definition of our concept in mind at the moment, just to let you know how we got to where we've got to so far. So let's take the term learning, for example. And again, with some of these terms, I'm going to point out how, say, some of the textbook definitions that you'll come across so far, they're not really enough for the purposes that we have in transformative innovation, and how we need to kind of bootstrap onto some of those to kind of fully capture what we mean and what's going to be useful for us in the context that we're involved in. So an example of that is learning. There's a textbook definition that I've come across, which is learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior, which occurs as a function of practice. Now, when we think about traditional innovation policy, so which might be called second generation innovation policy, innovation systems type policy, that kind of thing, that emphasizes a type of learning known as behavioral learning. So it's learning that you can see because you can see how people's behavior changes. And specifically, it's looking at learning processes like learning by doing, learning by using, and learning by interacting. Okay, and we've been used to these type of learning processes for the last 20, 30 years as this policy framing has been prevalent. What transformative innovation brings as a new layer to that. So it's not getting rid of that learning is still essential, but on top of that, there's a new strata of learning which is required, which is more cognitive learning. So cognitive learning is more reflexive and involves shifts in shared meanings and mental models, and it also requires a much more individual and group understanding of their strategic context. And that's useful for us in transformative innovation because we're looking for distributed actions across a wide range of actors. So everybody will need to know directionality, and everybody will need to know the strategic context that they operate in. So those type of learning processes, those type of cognitive learning processes include things you may have come across and things we've mentioned already here. So learning loops, single, double, triple loop learning, transformative learning, unlearning comes into play, deep learning, and also anticipatory learning. So that's what we mean by learning in this context. Second term I'm going to unpick is strategy, what we mean by strategy. I found a really nice definition of this, which will lead me into the next definition as well. So I'm going to define it for a second as a reallocation of resources and capabilities to meet objectives and aspirations. Okay, and that refers both to policy and to private sector organizations, any organization that would cover. So that type of definition implies there's a process by which strategy can be developed. And within that strategy process, again, you take your textbook off the shelf, you'll tend to come across maybe a 2 or 3 stage strategy process, which involves elements of strategic generation, so generation of insights by looking at the internal and external environment, strategic formulation, so translating those insights into some level of strategic prioritization and a strategic plan. And finally, strategic implementation. So you already have your plan in place. You now put that in action. You're budgeting, you're executing the plans as they're laid out per schedule. You're looking at performance measurement and management and trying to learn from those processes. So those type of concepts have been in the private sector strategy management sphere for a long, long time. We've got things like emergent strategy is a quite well-established concept in that area. One of the interesting things that we've come across with transformative innovation, I think, is that the strategy process we need to extend a bit. We need to add on a couple of extra phases to cover some of the activities, some of the thinking that we're talking about here. I've discovered maybe at least two more phases that we need to add on to that strategy process. The first is strategic orientation, which is all about thematic orientation and effective constitution of directionality. For businesses, it's about a business deciding what business it wants to be in, essentially. And that's kind of values-based. And there's an even earlier stage of a strategy process that we consider, which is strategic agenda setting. And I think this is where Bjorn Ola is sitting at the moment in terms of negotiating on the COP. We're looking at the overall specification of strategic direction and objectives for change. And that's very much at a political discourse level. So we've got this 5-stage strategy process. Not every stage of this process will be used by every organization, but it gives you an indication of some of the type of activities we're looking at within this.
May I ask you just
Sure.
because when we go to policy, when you talk about these kind of things within a private organization or an organization, you are really looking at the resources. How do I utilize my capabilities within this organization in a competitive environment?
Sure.
Now, in the situation we are in as agencies and governments is that we use the resources to invest in others, so they will act in certain ways. Which is not only so we have ourselves to take to consider, but mainly to consider how do we use, for example, our budget, which we put in a competitive calls outside to others in order to support. So it really emphasizes another level of strategic thinking that and can you comment on that, because this is much more about within their organization.
Sure. So this is where a third term that I'm going to define comes in really, really useful. So within strategic management, there's a concept called dynamic capabilities, which has been around for about 25, 30 years. There's a lot of literature on it. So there's a lot of understanding about what makes organizations, or how organizations particularly, can reconfigure and build their capabilities and their competencies to address rapidly changing environments. Traditionally, that concept has been about building competitive advantage. But there's been a couple of developments over the last 5-10 years, which makes it particularly interesting for us in transformative innovation. So first off, it takes a look at instances not just of dynamic markets, but also anything up to and including shocked landscapes. So really, really dramatic changes that have become much more topical since the COVID pandemic. So there's been a lot of expansion in that area. Number two, it covers exactly what you're describing, Kjell. It covers not only the resources and capacities within an organization setting, it also looks at how an organization can influence capacities, resources outside of external settings. And there are a couple of dynamic capabilities that are known that can be used in that kind of arena that we can bring into our considerations. Third one is that it's expanded out from a private sector focus to include public sector organizations. Again, this is a relatively recent development, particularly since the COVID pandemic, and the response to the COVID pandemic demonstrated how useful dynamic capabilities would be in terms of restructuring and reconfiguring resources. It's become more of a topic of concern, and Mariana Mazzucato is doing a lot of work on this. So the concept itself focuses on two types of capabilities. Dynamic capabilities, as I've mentioned, abilities to integrate, build, reconfigure internal and external competencies to address rapidly changing environments. And ordinary capabilities, which is about the efficient execution of routine administrative, operational, and governance tasks. Now, going back to a point that Mikhail mentioned earlier on about uncertainty, we know that in contexts of uncertainty, dynamic capabilities are more important than ordinary capabilities. Or another way of thinking about this is doing the right thing at the right time is more important than doing things right. So dynamic capabilities we can use to figure out how people go about some of these new practices and processes that we're targeting within transformative innovation, and also how we can try to disseminate that knowledge further. Recognizing, of course, and this goes back to the point I made earlier on, recognizing that we're not just talking about tools. Ordinary capabilities we can disseminate in terms of best practices or tools. Dynamic capabilities are going to be trickier to disseminate because they're more complex combinations of capabilities.
So how do we, if we go to a more concrete day-to-day situation, we have like two levels that we work on. One is really to change the ecosystems or the capabilities within the ecosystems in order to support development that is helping us to reach a more sustainable future. The other thing that we also do is we invest money in providing improving the capabilities of firms and public organizations to really embed sustainability within their processes, within their value propositions, within their networking, their partnership, and so on. So the theories that you now presented, can you comment on how can I use them when I go back to my desk after this podcast and see how should I design an intervention for the ecosystem level, but also looking at the firm level, because that needs to be changed also.
Well, I think this is where Etten particularly comes in really useful, and can really demonstrate value in terms of quite a difficult dissemination, I guess. So Etten can focus on bringing together conceptual people like me that has some knowledge of some of the academic literature on this stuff, plus people who are actually at the sharp end in terms of putting some of this thinking into practice. Where I've found, and I've been looking at dynamic capabilities for a while now, where I've found these two sides can meet and engage in constructive conversations is at a level called a low-level dynamic capability. Sometimes you might come across it as a micro-foundational dynamic capability. So within the literature, dynamic capabilities focuses on 3 high-level capabilities: how to sense opportunities, how to seize opportunities, and how to transform your operations to support growing those opportunities. But beneath those, you've got a load of different lower-level dynamic capabilities, which is where it's essentially how people think about how they go about doing things. And where that's actually coming into play really usefully, I think, is a conversation I'm having with Lena and Jakob at the moment in demand acceleration. So Lena and Jakob very kindly did one of these podcasts a couple of weeks back where they presented the demand acceleration approach, and also mentioned that they have a handbook on how you might go about doing this. I've taken that handbook and I've done a deep dive to try to figure out what some of these lower level dynamic capabilities are, and speculated what some of the supporting learning processes behind those things might be. And from my perspective, and Lena and Jakob I know are in the audience, and maybe they can give their own perspectives later on in the questions. I found that a really useful way of meeting of minds, essentially, of trying to figure out in their contexts what's working well, what's not working well, and what type of new learning they can target through new processes that we'll have to figure out how to do, but what type of new learning process they need to bring in, which can make demand acceleration more effective. So I think that's the way of approaching this in terms of disseminating some of the, first of all, figuring out what this new knowledge is, and then disseminating it in specific contexts.
So how do you nudge, because in the previous podcast, we also discussed a little bit of the importance of mindsets, changing mindset, because that's coupled to the ontology and also the culture that really helps us drive mindsets. So in a situation like in Lena and Jakob and in other situations where we really, for example, the discussion I had with Nesta and with the growth policy analysis agency, how can we use these in order to nudge people to really move outside their context and think about their work and their context in a new way, so that help them this kind of cognitive learning of how to move forward?
So conceptually, we know that say double loop, triple loop learning come into play here. Double loop and triple loop learning are reflexive learning, gets people to think about what they do and question what they do, critically question what they do in terms of trying to figure out, are there better ways of doing it, and what does better mean in that context. At a conceptual level, we know that's the way to go. Now, there are a couple of issues, I think, with this. Number one, a lot of double loop, triple loop learning seems to be set in not necessarily just in classroom situations, but certainly on one-to-one or within group situations. And we're trying to figure out, are there ways that we can bring double loop and triple loop learning into larger context, into network learning, into community of practice-based learning, as a way of disseminating this quicker without these one-to-one interactions. So so conceptually we know how to do it. In practice, we're still trying to figure out how best to go about this, I think.
it is a way of introducing a new design, because I'm very intrigued in how should design methods for experimentation look like, and how can we inform what needs to be changed, and how can we interpret this kind of so can this kind by learning by doing, which was more on the behavioral learning, be also applied on this kind of cognitive learning? Because by the end of the day, we need to do activities, and how can we have these activities leverage the way we want to change, for example, culture, mindsets, and the way we look at ourselves and the things we want to achieve?
This is obviously a key question. I think it's very easy to just, to assume that you're doing these things when you may just be doing behavioral learning. So I think recognizing when and how you can achieve this double loop learning and triple loop learning is a key question. What I'm looking for, I guess, is a situation where I can actually do a deep dive into how people go about doing that. And I know Tipsy, for example, do a lot in this area, particularly around their formative evaluation as an approach about how doing things. So for their approach, they're very focused on designing experiments and then evaluating those experiments through formative evaluation. They also bring in monitoring, learning by monitoring. So performing the experiment, designing the experiment, performing the experiment, and then asking questions, I guess, might be the best way to describe the approach of how they go about doing these things, which encourage reflexivity within the group that are running the experiment. And that's a bit of an art rather than a science. So you're looking for, those penny drop moments to make connections, or getting people to make connections and to start questioning what they're doing. There's not a prescription for that I've come across, at least so far. I'm still trying to figure one out. As soon as I do, I'll let you know.
So we have to do this experimenting on all levels, as I mentioned. An observation: would it need a new kind of, with any kind of changes in society? There's always some new work positions or positions coming up. So would organizations need this kind of cognitive learning manager who really makes this kind of reflexive questions, and doing a little bit of what I felt Tipsy was doing when they were working with us at VINNOVA, to be the devil's advocate and always question everything, and so you get this kind of new positions in order to drive this kind of learning.
Awesome.
Yeah, Kjell Håkan.
Yeah.
Kjell Håkan.
Yes.
Why don't we? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm checking a little bit time here. Why don't we throw out that question to the participants here? What do they think? Do we need another kind of capability? I mean, it would be interesting to sort of get a little bit of their reactions on what I thought was. I mean, this has been a great conversation. I just wanted to sort of see if there are any spontaneous reactions on this.
May I throw a question also that Len and everybody else can also think about? The only topic that we haven't really covered is scaling, because scaling that leads to more human interactions leads to emergent properties and non-linear behavior, which you really. So scaling becomes completely a new concept in these kind of situations, rather than the previous kind of ways we have been looking at scaling. And that's a topic, the only topic that we, in my view, still haven't been touched upon. And if you can give a very short reflection on that, Len, and then we can throw out everything to the audience, and they can also come in with their comments and questions.
So just very quickly on the scaling question, the third high-level dynamic capability moves away from sensing opportunities and seizing opportunities, the first two high-level ones, and into transforming operations to grow those opportunities and to embed those opportunities further. And I think so within this dynamic capabilities concept, there should be lower level dynamic capabilities which can inform how you go about scaling those. But because we've only started getting into and I'm talking about in the academic literature, because we've only started getting into dynamic capabilities in the public sector in the last couple of years, we're still very much at a high level, and we need more empirical explorations of how you actually go about that to identify those low-level capabilities.
And before showing, I'm sure we will have more podcasts on strategic learning. we're not ending here. So please, anyone that has any comments, questions, or wants to throw some wood in the fire. Any hand? Can you? I don't see any hands. Lina. I don't hear you. Now.
No, yes, I hope I've covered enough here. The Wi-Fi is a bit shaky, but thinking of this scaling up of the strategic learning, etc., and scaling from small groups to bigger groups, etc., to be able to create some kind of transformation. What change does that need to happen in order to make that happen, based on the way we normally disseminate things? We put reports on websites, we have seminars, and that's about it. I mean, with the ongoing AI revolution, I mean, shouldn't there be more opportunities to use that in order to scale strategic learning? What's your take on that?
We've actually been thinking about this together, yourself and myself, Lena. We were looking for information about how you go about scaling demand acceleration. So I've done a quick dig around the literature to find what I can find in this area. Funnily enough, it didn't really get into AI from what I've seen so far, what I've seen out there in the literature in terms of an approach about how you can scale these things. What literature I have come across has talked about using a place-based approach. So place-based approach will involve getting local stakeholders together and thinking about how best to, capture the potential of their particular areas, and then making transformative change, or one approach would be to make transformative change. So that's one particular way of doing it. And I know we've spotted a paper that you can potentially bring double loop and triple loop learning into more of a network learning environment. So again, getting away from a classroom and getting more into disseminating things through networks as a possible approach. So there are a couple of things out there, a couple of threads out there that we can kind of grab onto, I think, in terms of figuring out what the best way of going about this might be. But again, we'll need to kind of figure, we'll need to pull all these threads together, I guess, basically, and come up with a platter of options.
Jakob.
Yes, thank you very much, both Len and Kjell Håkan, because this is very inspiring. Looking forward to more meetings like this. I'm thinking about once upon a time, Kjell Håkan, you provided us with a sketch about an innovation ecosystem built on actors, actions, and artifacts. Mm-hmm. And if you apply that one on the learning loop, in at least in my sketch I made here, that actors who perform actions, they are practicing, and from practice we get learnings, and from learnings we can put this into artifacts, and artifacts could be used for new actors to win. So you actually could combine those two models, I think, and that leads me to the thinking of innovation commons, because artifacts played well could be a common asset. So what is your take on strategic learning and the concept of innovation commons? Do you see they are interrelated in some way?
Are you directing it to me or to Len?
I'm looking at Len, but you can see that, Kjell Håkan.
But let me add before Len, because in that model also, we, as you know, Jakob, we have been talking, I've been advocating also that we have to move from consortia to communities, and work with communities more than we are traditionally policy working with consortia, and so communities are a context where we can do a lot of what Len has been talking about better than consortia. But Len, please.
I think it's a really point on the artifacts that's really kind of struck a bell with me, and my concern with this, I guess, is that we know from the literature that dynamic capabilities are complex combinations, which makes them difficult to substitute, difficult to imitate, and probably more valuable than ordinary capabilities. We also know that they're going to look different in different contexts. So in terms of transferring them into an artifact, I'm not entirely sure how that might work, or if we did that, would we actually be fooling ourselves and focusing on an ordinary capability rather than a dynamic capability? I think that's a question to be asked. But it's certainly an approach, and as we try to figure out how dynamic capabilities can be disseminated, we'll have to think about these questions, I think, in more detail.
So now we have a hand, Conway.
I'm on mute. Hi, I'm calling in from London. I really appreciate this so much because it's so in the domain of the space that that I'm working in. I remember actually having a conversation at the Swedish Innovation Days with some of the people in the building, and we actually talked about effectuation back in the day.
Yeah.
And it really interesting. So I mean, I'm really geeking out with this conversation. So thank you. I just wanted to say that first. But also because a lot of the research that I've been working on is trying to work on this concept of a public entrepreneur mindset, and what are the elements or the cognitive elements underpinning those that then are, if you like, that we can isolate. And what's interesting in what you're talking about is that strategic learning is probably the thing that I observe the most in the world of third generation innovation policy as being the kind of, well, this is where we can evolve these capabilities. We're doing it in an abductive way, so we're not worried about what you had said right at the beginning about, well, you know, when they do the evaluation, are they going to say, well, what did you do? You know, we're talking about this as a formative, but I think that the interesting thing really is to start creating clarity on the parameters of transformation, so that we can say if we're heading on a roadmap of transformation and we can agree on what that is, we can at least see how are we doing towards getting there through this strategic learning. Because I think the biggest challenge I've seen is the boundaries of when are we investing well here in this strategic learning process and practicing effectively what we're doing. And I use it through design methods, but other people may use other things. How do you know when to pivot is one of the biggest challenges that I experience in my work here. And I'm just interested in your reflections in the work that you're doing with the Transformation Innovation Policy Consortium.
So not so much the TIP-C work, but some work that I've done on my day job essentially, was to dig into what Kjell referred to earlier on as different ontologies of transformative innovation, or transformation rather, and then try to pick out some of the dynamic capabilities that might support different ontological perspectives of change. Okay, so I've used about 8 different types of ontologies and pinpointed dynamic capabilities where I can find evidence of them in the literature. There's an ontology that we haven't covered today, a temporal ontology, which kind of assumes that change happens within networks, and these networks have temporal properties and certain capabilities you can use to to take account of time. And there are a couple of known dynamic capabilities which can come into play there. I think one specifically kind of hits the nail on the head for you for the context you're describing, which is basically about timing opportunities. Can't remember what it was called now, but there is some literature out there on that. I'm happy to share that with you later on if you're interested. But yeah, there are, again, I'm talking about these threads that are out there that we can put together. There are these threads there. I've seen some of them through this work. A lot of the work that's out there is quite conceptual rather than practical, but at least it gives you an early indication of some of the things we can think about and how we might approach some of these issues.
I would also add to that, and I think Olivia wants to get into the gaming soon, but I think there's still a lot of this kind of management by objectives thinking in policy and governments, and that in some way comes also with the missions. Measurability is so important in the management of objectives kind of culture. And I was listening to somebody some time ago which said something very sensible for this transformative. We should move from management by objectives and measurability. It's much more important to understand understandability, so that we collectively understand where we are going and that we know the speed and direction that we are taking in systems or communities or societies. And that's a bit different from the classical, management by objective and measurability kind of thinking that we are so governed by today. I don't know if anyone wants to very shortly comment, and we leave the floor to Olivia to play with us. Olivia, do you want to take over or?
Yes, of course. Of course. Yes.
Which microphone? Okay, great. Okay, now to the fun stuff, the game segments. So those of you who have visited our Innovation Circle episodes before, you may already be familiar with it. I'll provide a brief overview. So the game is called 2 Lies and 1 Truth. So in this case, both our expert Len and the moderator Kjell Håkan, they've sent in 3 statements, and now it's up to the participants to guess with us which of the statements could be true. Now in experience, we've had a lot of creative statements, so the bar is set very high, and I'll ask Irion to
we're lowering the bar. We're lowering
to a manageable level, exactly. So yeah, these are the statements that Len provided. The first one, I have fought a scorpion using a waste paper basket and a sock. The second one, I have spent a night in jail for trying to install a contraceptive vending machine in university. And the third, a tank once pointed its gun at me and I was unsure if it would fire. So I think the bar has been raised again. I invite everyone to please go ahead and vote which you think is the right response. And now it's head-on-head between the first and the second statement. Seems like it's a split opinion. The third one doesn't seem as likely, Len, so still voting. I'll give it a couple more minutes, seconds. Okay, seems the number is stopped, so we have a tie between the first and the second statement. So, I mean, congratulations on these sentences, Len. Please let us know which one is the truth.
So, first of all 3 are true, but only one of them is true for me. The other 2 are true for my partner, who's led a much more interesting life than I've had. The one that's true for me is I did fight a scorpion with a waste paper basket and a sock. This was in the Kalahari Desert in South Africa a number of years ago, where I'm from Ireland. We don't do scorpions in Ireland, so I didn't really have a kind of a mental memory of how you deal with them. This worked perfectly. I was able to tempt him out with a sock like a lion tamer, waste paper basket on top, shuffle them out the door, problem's gone.
Excellent. So I'm guessing the waste paper basket and the sock were not your weapons of choice, right? It was probably just something that you had at hand that you decided to fight this scorpion off with.
As I say, I don't have a muscle memory of how to go about fighting scorpions, but yeah, this worked.
Yeah, well, I mean, now you know the next time you're confronted with a scorpion, you already have much more experience. Thank you so much again, Len. As you can see, there's really good sentences you provided. So now we'll move on to Kjell. And I'd ask Irene to submit the poll. Exactly. So now round 2. The first sentence, I was in my teens regarded as a talented middle distance runner. The second one, I was in my teens regarded as a talented bass player. And the third one, in my teens, I was regarded as a talented chess player. So mainly about what was Kjell Håkan's specialty in his teens. And I see the votes already coming in. It seems, yeah, the third one is not as popular as the first 2. And it seems that the votes have stopped. So Kjell Håkan, please let us know which of the 2 is right, which of the 3.
The one I was talented. I was regarded as a talented bass player when I do a lot of. I'm an endorphin addict, so I do a lot of running and exercising, but not in competitiveness, in competitive context. And I also basically I did a lot of chess and especially Go in my teens, but nothing in a competitive environment. But bass I've been playing in dance bands, in progressive bands, in rock bands, and during my university, it was like it was always fun to play during university because it was like Beatlemania when you were on stage.
Excellent. So you're still playing the bass on a regular basis?
Yeah, I had many years of it was laying around, but I never sold it. Also, but when I got a bit older now, I picked it up again, and now it's one of my favorite things to relax with.
Excellent. I mean, in that case, our introductory tune of the Innovation Circle podcast also has sort of a bass line. So maybe we could think about a special concert for us, Kjell Håkan. Keep that in mind. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and it's turning out that given that Lena's past experiences, we're sort of getting into a pretty serious Etin performance at some point.
Etin band.
Etin band. I mean, Jesus. So yeah, we're closing into the hour, and again, very inspiring to listening to what we've heard, and to me, it really shows the importance of also sometimes going back to previous episodes and previous themes and see, because on the one hand, it's quite remarkable what has happened since our conversation in November. Since I was moderating that occasion, I really don't want to go back to that episode because we were all over the place. Here we found something that is increasingly tangible, and now the next step is obviously to bring in the how do you do it and have the reflections from people that are actually living the experience. It's still conceptual, but we're getting there, and I think this could be really a contribution. Also, I personally, I really like the way that we also see how the different work streams that we're working or having the task forces that we're having within Etin is actually connected, as they are in reality. I mean, what we do when we do podcasts is that we sort of do this the distinction between things, and we do a conceptual framing where in fact this interacts, and finally we're sort of even getting into that. So with that said, thank you so much. I just wanted to flag for then the next episode in 2 weeks, although that's going to be on a Wednesday. Not the reason why we had it today was actually that it's a holiday, or a UN holiday tomorrow, so it's actually we're closed. But in 2 weeks, Wednesday 2 weeks, we're going to switch to another topic and go back to try to find a new framing of transformative innovation and discuss social entrepreneurship. And we're actually going to do that pretty much in the Balkan context, just to sort of show that these are general topics, and also because it has a relevance in that region. And Emanuela has volunteered to moderate. So I don't know if you want to say something more about it, or if you just want to.
I want to keep the tension built up. So if you want to know more, you'll have to join, unfortunately.
And then I just say, watch out for the video. Watch out for the video. We don't know what she's capable of. Again, thank you so much for this, Kjell Håkan, and there will certainly be more episodes on strategic learning. I can see that coming up. So. Thanks to everyone that attended. Hope to see you in 2 weeks, and have a great evening. Bye.
Thanks for your attention.